Good morning, students. Welcome to the subject of business organization and management, and we are dealing with unit number 3, that is related to controlling. In the previous session, we have already seen the control process consisting of 4 different stages, right? That is establishment of standards. First, we establish the standards, that means we make the plans, right? In the next stage, we measure the performance, that is by collecting the data through the different sources. We try to measure the performance. In the third stage, we try to actually compare the actual performance with the preset standards or the plans, and at the end we take up the corrective actions. So none of the controlling process is complete without the fourth stage, that is taking the corrective actions. Alright, in today's session we are going to take up with the control areas. That means in which area the controlling is required, or which areas are such wherein the control process works. Number 1, as you can see it here, it is control over the organization structure. That means what type of activity the organization takes up, what is the structure of the organization, how complex or simple the structure of the organization is. Depending upon that, the control can be placed on the organization structure. Next comes up is over the policies. What type of strict or liberal policies are there, what type of controlling should be there related to the policies is related to the area which is known as policies. The third one comes up is procedure. That means different departments or different workings or actions may have different types of procedures, and there has to be a kind of control over it, so that there is no strict procedure, or there is no complex kind of procedure which will lead to any kind of ambiguity further. That is why control over procedure is also required. So different procedures need a different type of control system, and that is the area number 3. Next comes up is personal control or control over personnel. Personnel means the group of people who are working in the organization, or say the staff members. So what type of staff the organization holds, or maybe what type of employees are there, what type of control can be placed on them, and what type of activities can be considered as the standard activity, what type of activities or unnecessary activities can be avoided. Likewise, the control over the activities of the personnel or maybe the staff can be placed, and that is why this area is control over personnel or maybe the human resource. Next comes up is control over production. Control over production means the number of products that are to be produced during a day, or during or within the hour, only that leads to meeting up of the deadline. So that is fixed initially, that what type of production or what type of units have to be produced in what time duration, and that should be mentioned, and that should be maintained also, and that is what is known as control over production, right? Next comes up is production process. See, production is done through different types of production processes. There can be several types of processes related to production, પણ organization ને કયું suitable production process છે, કેટલા એના resources છે, કઈ રીતે capital setup થયેલું છે, કઈ રીતે machineries નો ઉપયોગ છે, કઈ technology નો ઉપયોગ થાય છે, all these fixes the production process, and a kind of overlook over the production process is a must, and that can be considered as control over the production process. Next comes up is control over sales. Control over sales means whatever it doesn't mean that this much sales is done, so we don't exceed the sales. It will never be the policy. Control over sales means a target sales is first set, that this much amount of selling should be there, or these many units should be sold off, and only then the company reaches the rate of return, or maybe the return on investment is there, right? So that sales unit is fixed first, and accordingly the thing is planned out that how we can meet these sales targets. So if we are not meeting the sales targets, that means some more efforts is required, and that is what is known as control over sales. Next comes up is control over finance. Then finance is, we all know that it is considered to be the lifeblood of any organization. So finance is required in every petty kind of activity conducted by the organization. If and moreover, what is important is finance is never in abundant. It is always then, it is in a a kind of quantity that is to be economically and very judiciously used, right? So unless and until we don't make the perfect use of finance that we have received as the source of finance, and then we'll not be able to get the profit, or will not be able to maintain the margins. So it is very important to check that the finance is being utilized most judiciously in the most economical manner. There is no wastage of finance on the side of the management or in any of the activities of the organization, and that type of control is said to be the control over finance. Next comes up is overall performance. Naturally, if you just take an overview again, that it is organization structure, that means જે સંસ્થાનું માળખું છે ત્યાંથી લઈને એની પોલિસીઝ, પ્રોસિજર્સ, પર્સનલ, પ્રોડક્શન, સેલ્સ, પ્રોડક્શન પ્રોસેસ, ફિનાન્સ એન્ડ ઓવરઓલ પરફોર્મન્સ, બધી જ જગ્યા, બધી જ એક્ટિવિટીઝ જો કંટ્રોલ થાય તો જ તમે ઓવરઓલ પરફોર્મન્સ છે એને ઇમ્પ્રૂવ કરી શકો છો. સો ઇટ ઇઝ વેરી ઇમ્પોર્ટન્ટ ટુ કંટ્રોલ ઓલ these areas or keep a kind of controlling system over all these areas. That depends how rigid or liberal the controlling system may be, but definite controlling system is a must. Why? Because that leads to achieving the planned goals. Only if controls are there, then the goals can be achieved. If not, then it becomes really very difficult for the organization to detect the errors, to find out the errors, to correct it and to rectify it, or maybe correct and rectify it so that none of the mistakes are committed again in the future. That is why all these areas are to be checked, they are to be controlled, right? Then and then there can be an overall controlling system. So overall these segments or these areas can be considered to be the control areas. All right, we move on to the next one, which is known as span of control. Now span of control, actually here we are just going to introduce ourselves to span of control. That means so many areas of control are there. See, every time it may not be possible for a manager to control each and every number of people, and at that time the span, that means the limit of the control, has to be decided. So the number of subordinates that a manager can effectively control is called the span of control. That means when a manager can very effortlessly or effectively control a number of people, then that can be considered to be as the span of control, right? So there is a limit to the ability and the capacity of the superior to effectively manage and control his subordinates. So at a time, if a person can control 10 subordinates and their activities, then it is the span of control of that particular manager can be considered to be the 10 subordinates. And likewise, that means all the overall activities and all simple activities of the subordinates can be controlled. The deviation can be found out and the rectification can be there. So that limit is to be checked and that limit is to be fixed. That is what is known as span of control. બધા બધું જ નથી કરી શકતા હોતા, એટલે બધા જ મેનેજર અથવા એક મેનેજર બધાને નથી સંભાળી શકતો હોતો. So if he is dealing with the production management or maybe production department, and if 50 workers are there, then his span of control can be considered to be 50 workers, right? That means his way of dealing or his the controlling system is only limited to those 550 people, not beyond that. That means he is not supposed to check the activities of the finance department staff, or maybe HR staff, or maybe sales or marketing staff. That means he is just having the limited controlling system, or his span of control is related to the production area consisting of 50 workers. So that is what is known as span of control, right? Next, what we are going to discuss are the factors determining the span of control. Now, if we have understood what is span of control, that means the limit that a manager can take into his system, or he can actually control these many people, the number of subordinates, that can be considered to be span of control. હવે એ span of control અમુક determinants ઉપર decide કરી શકાય છે. That means how well the manager is, how well the subordinates are, what is the planning structure, what is the nature of work, etc., right? And those can be considered to be the factors that decides the span of control. Haphazardly any controlling system or span of control cannot be determined. It is through different that means there has to be a proper study of different factors affecting this span of control, and that those factors have been mentioned here. If we try to just see it, it is number one, time devoted by the manager. See, if the manager can devote more time on each one of the the worker, then or he needs to devote more time on each one of the worker or each one of the employee, then at that time his span of control will be less. That means individually he needs to check all the 50 workers, then definitely it becomes difficult for him to check the 50 workers or the work of 50 workers at a time. So what time is devoted by a manager, that depends. If a less time is required to guide, to mentor the subordinates, then at a time he can have a large span of control, and vice versa, right? Next comes up is training of subordinates. Well trained the subordinates are, less will be the control required. So, and if they are untrained, unskilled labor is being used, then definitely manager needs to guide them and needs to mentor them at each and every stage. Then at that time the span of control will be low or maybe limited, right? Next comes up is effectiveness of communication. If the communication system is very effective in an organization, that means everything is being understood, whatever is to be done by the subordinates, then at that time if the span of control is wider, then also manager can easily check on them. But if the communication system is poor, if there is a kind of weakness in understanding what has been communicated by the subordinates, then at that time to make them understand also, every time there will be involvement of the manager required, and at that time what happens is the span of control automatically has to be reduced or it has to be decreased, so that more number of people and their queries, less number of people or maybe subordinates and more number of queries can be solved out. Next point is about the capacity and intelligence of the managers. That means more the capacity and the intelligence of the manager to control more number of people, naturally the span of control would be accordingly. And next comes up is nature of work. Nature of work means what type of work is to be done by the subordinates. If the work is quite easy and it is simple, it is not complex in performance, then what happens is span of control can be wider, because at that time the manager need not just interfere in each and every matter or the work that is performed. At that time he can just be relieved by just giving the simple orders to the say the worker or maybe subordinates. Then it depends completely that what span of control will be on the nature of the work that is to be performed. Next concept is planning. How well the organization is having the planning system. If the planning system is very well, it is well defined, it is very particular and punctual about say getting the plans or achieving the plans, then the span of control can be wider, because everyone knows that everything has to be considered or has to be completed within the planning schedule, right? So say accurate the planning is, wider can be the span of control. Next concept is dynamism of business. If the business activities keep on changing every now and then, right, it is very dynamic in nature, then what happens is that every time the manager has to take the initiative to make those changes understood to the subordinates, and at that time the dynamism of the business if more, then the span of control ultimately is less, because that will affect the performance of every worker or every subordinate, and at that time the total involvement on the part of a manager is a must. So at that time the span of control reduces. Next comes up is degree of decentralization. More the decentralization, less will be the span of control on the part of managers. More at a decentralized level, the span of control can be extended. So these can be considered those factors which should be considered while deciding the span of control under a manager, right? So these are all the factors, or we can call it the determinants that decides the span of control. Let us move to the next part, that is types of control. See, the control can be of many types. Here broadly we have decided on the basis of standards, on the basis of its different uses, and on the basis of the activities that is being performed by the control system. So let us take the first classification, that is on the basis of standards. I repeat, the classification is on the basis of standards, on the basis of different uses, and on the basis of activities, right? Let us take on the basis of standards. See, standards generally which are quantifiable, means which can be measured, then they can be considered to be the easiest way to set, and then the controlling becomes easy. So on the basis of standards, that can be physical control or it can be financial control. Physical control means, for example, say 500 units in a month are to be produced, then 500 units you can count, you can quantify them, and that is why it can be considered as physical control, right? Or maybe number of workers which we can count and their activities can be quantified, or they can be counted, and accordingly the controlling system can be held. Or say the number of machineries, then again that can be count, and whatever the performance of the machine is, that can be again kept as the physical control system, right? So it can, whatever units or whatever activities which we can control by counting physically or by checking a physical standard, that is considered to be physical control system. The next comes up is financial control system. We have talked earlier also that financial control means, because the finance is such a kind of inevitable ingredient for a business, it is a lifeblood of the business, and definite controlling system has to be there on any other activity prior than the finance activities, right? So financial control is a must on the part of the organization. And when you control finance, means we are going to check the revenues generated and the expenses that are being say done on the other part, right? So we try to balance both the things, that the revenues are enough to take up with the finance or maybe the expense, and the expenses do not exceed the revenues. So that kind of control related to money in any of the aspect of the organizational activities can be considered as financial control. So on the basis of standards, it can be physical control or it can be financial control. Now when we move to the next category, that is on the basis of different uses. As we know that control system has different use, right? It can be used for so many different purposes, and on that basis this bifurcation has been given here. Say control used to standardize performance, these ways the things are to be done, or this is to be performed. If such kind of standards are to be set depending upon the performance, then it is said to be control used to standardize the performance. Means you give a kind of uniformity to the performance, and then that type of control is said to be the control used for standardizing the performance. Next comes up is control used to safeguard the company's assets, right? Many a times company's assets are expensive and they are to be safeguarded. Then at that time some kind of controlling methods are being used, or some kind of controlling system is being established so as to maintain the company's assets. So the controlling system is just to check the company's assets, then that can be considered as use number 2. The third one is to standardize quality. Very, very important in today's era. The customers have become very quality conscious, and at that time it is very important on the part of organization, may it be producing products or services, to standardize the quality or to give the qualitative products to the customers. If they are charging high, then at that time what is expected on the part of the customer is the quality, and you need to standardize the quality. You need to uniformly give the qualitative work or qualitative product to the customers, and that is when you keep a control on the quality, that is said to be the use number 3, that is standardized quality. Next usage of the control is in delegation of the authority, or what person will do what type of work, and whether he is eligible for it, or whether he is able to perform his duty accordingly or not. That is what can be decided with the help of the authority, or say delegation of authority, and a kind of control is being placed on them. Next comes up is control used to measure the performance. So what happens is the performance is being measured and a control is being kept. That means the standards are being set that this ways you have to perform, and if not, then you may be punished, or there can be different types of reactions against it. And such kind of performance measures can only be taken when the controlling system is there for such kind of activity. Control used to measure the total performance. Overall performance we have discussed earlier also. Overall performance matters a lot, and if you want a total quality production or maybe total quality performance, then at that time a controlling system just taking care of the total overall performance of the organization is considered to be the controlling used for such kind of performances. Next comes up is control to synchronize all activities. See, we all know that in an organization several activities are performed, and once they are being performed, they may be performing individually in the individual department, but ultimately these activities are to be synchronized, they are to be chained together, they are to be associated together, so that overall organizational objectives are achieved. And synchronizing all these activities also require control, and that is why on the basis of users, this becomes the last bifurcation, right? So overall here we have seen all those controlling types which are on the basis of the use of the control in an organization for the different activities. We are moving towards the third type, that is on the basis of activities. See, like control over policies, control over procedure, over organization, personnel, inventory, quality, overall performance, etc., right? So what type of activities are being performed in the organization? Depending upon that, say a control can be held on the policies, there can be over the procedures, there can be for the organization and how it runs, over the people or maybe the staff or personnel. It may be over the inventory means all the types of stocks, all the types of say raw materials, work in progress, say semi-finished goods, finished goods, whatever is there in the outlet, whatever is lying in the godown or warehouses, everything consists of inventory, right? So there can be the type of inventory or the number of inventories that are being managed by the organization, that is said to be control over the inventory. So each inventory, each stock and raw material is being checked personally by the organizational controlling system that is developed for inventory control, right? Next comes up is control over quality. We just had the discussion earlier that quality plays very important role. What type of quality and what type of qualitative product you wish to give to the customer, depending upon that the controlling system or the activity may be managed and the control can be placed. And the last one comes up is overall performance, means how well you want the organization to run, how well you want all the activities to be performed, and depending on that overall performance of the organization becomes the activity that is to be controlled. So what we have discussed right here is we have taken up with the types of control on the three different bases, on the basis of activities, on the basis of different uses, and on the basis of standards, right? I hope the things are clear. Next, what we are going to do today is importance or maybe the advantages of control. We have seen the areas, we have seen the types of control. Now what we are trying to find out are the benefits or advantages. So if you have controlling system for the various types of organizational activities, then at the same time it has its own importance, it has its own benefits, right? So there are so many benefits if you have a controlling system for the various activities. Like control helps in attainment of goals. Naturally, if the controlling system is there, we will actually come to know that what is our actual performance and what was planned, what are the deviations and what are the differences, and what should be the corrective actions, so that we can achieve the goals. So that is why the controlling is very, very helpful, and it is inevitable activity of the organization. Next comes up is control is the basis of planning. See, the controlling is dependent on planning, right? We know this, that controlling is for controlling the base is planning, and for the next terms planning or for the next phase of planning, again the controlling is required. So control is the basis of the next planning. So whatever, supposingly whatever the defects or the deviations were there in the previous system, those can be rectified, and that becomes the planning of the next term, and that is why controlling becomes the basis of the planning for the next phase or for the future. Next importance is that controlling is useful to organizing also. That means organizing means creating the structure, assigning the authority and responsibility. So at that time, whatever organizing is required, if you have a proper controlling system, we can organize, or we can have the right person for the right job, and accordingly the structure can be framed and organizing can be done, right? Next comes up is directing can be made effective through control. Naturally, whatever you want people to do, that means management in action. Directing is management in action. Whatever you want people to or subordinates to do, that becomes very effective through control. Because if once the controlling criterias are known to the or the subordinates, then what happens is that they exactly know that how they are going to perform the work, right? And directing or guiding them for work then becomes easy and effective also. So that is the importance number 4. Next comes up is control helps the coordination. We have seen in the previous slide itself that all the activities are performed individually, maybe in the organization, but at the end what we need is the coordination, and that coordination can be created with the help of controlling system or different control methods that may be used by the organization. Next comes up is control is necessary for delegation of authority. It is related to organizing. So when the delegation of authority is there, that means ક્યારે પણ સત્તાની અને જવાબદારીની સોંપણી થાય છે ત્યારે જો એના ઉપર controlling system હોય તો ultimately the delegation of authority can be more viable, and it can be more strong, and it can be effective also. So the right person gets the right authority and he can exercise it for the right type of activities or maybe right type of people. Next comes up is control helps in removing mistakes and defects. We have seen in the control process that it is establishment of the standards. Then at the next stage what we do is we measure the performance. In the third stage what we do is we compare, right? We compare the actual performance with the preset standards. So when we do that, we can find out the mistakes, and what is important is the fourth stage, that we don't only find out the say the defects or deviations, but at the end we try to remove them through the corrective actions also. So controlling helps in removing the mistakes and defects, and the care is definitely taken up by the management to see that these mistakes and these defects are not further repeated, right? Next comes up is said to be the last part of today's session, that is known as limitations of control. If there is a good side of controlling system, it has its own limitations also, like difficulties of determining standards. See, in the types of control we have seen that there can be financial standards or there can be physical standards, but at times every organization cannot have the same types of standards. There may be so many types of different activities conducted, and at that time deciding the standards may be a great problem for the control, right? So for controlling system to be established, different standards becomes difficult to be decided, right? So that becomes limitation number 1. Next comes up is objective standards not possible. See, we can have the physical standard, we can count and we can control, but most of the time when the objectives are being set, what objective for present may not be the objectives for the future, and at that time the standards, the uniform standards cannot be established. Next, third limitation is difficult standards not possible. So when you are trying to determine or decide very tough standards, level of standards, then that becomes difficult to control. Then next, difficult to locate responsible factor. Yes, every time which factor is responsible for what result cannot be decided or cannot be located. So that becomes a limitation for detecting the mistakes and then further correcting it also. Next, for many organization, controlling system maybe with the different types of equipments or maybe with the different types of methods is expensive affair, or it becomes non-affordable affair, then that becomes the limitation. Next point comes up is locating control points. See, many times few points may be left out by the managerial control. So every time we cannot locate the control point કે અહીંયાથી આપણે controlling કરશું, અહીંયાથી ઓર્ગેનાઇઝેશન ની એક્ટિવિટીઝને આપણે અંકુશમાં લાવી શકશું, એવું દરેક વખતે એવા કંટ્રોલ પોઈન્ટ ફિક્સ કરવા ઓર્ગેનાઇઝેશન માટે શક્ય નથી થતા હોતા. નેક્સ્ટ કમ્સ અપ ઇઝ ઇમ્પેક્ટ ઓફ એક્સટર્નલ ફોર્સીસ. ડેફિનેટલી this is very important factor and none of the controlling system can avoid it or can forego it. That means whatever the external forces are, like say rise or fall in the prices, or maybe the government policies, or maybe the economic condition of the country, or maybe the sector, so many factors are such which are uncontrollable and which are outside the periphery of kind of unit. Then at that time the how it creates the impact on the organization and what controlling system you have already established may not coincide. So impact of external factors is very important kind of limitation that leads to the failure of a controlling system, right? So here what we have discussed are the advantages in the prior slide, and here we have also taken up with the limitations of control, right? So I'm going to end up today's session, and when we meet next we'll be taking up with more of the traditional techniques and say the conventional technique of using the control system. So in today's session what we have done is we have completed with the limitations of the controlling system. We have discussed the advantages, we have discussed the different types of the control, that is on the basis of standard, on the basis of different uses, on the basis of say the activities performed. We have also checked with the factors, we have also checked with the span of control and the factors determining the span of control, right? And we have seen what are the areas, what are those major areas that are there in the organization that needs a controlling system, right? So here we are ending up today's session, and when we meet next we shall be discussing more aspects of controlling, that is traditional and modern techniques. Till then, it's a goodbye from my side. Take care of yourselves. Thank you.